In communities and countries around the world, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex people have struggled to be who they are and to live their lives free from discrimination, violence or fear.
We belong to the human rights movement, we belong to the women's movement, we belong to youth movements, and it's broad.
We have been allowed for many years asking for the protection of our rights all over the world. And I think that it's the time now that governments really commit.
Increasingly, the United Nations has acknowledged its responsibility to end these human rights abuses.
Like many of my generation, I did not grow up talking about these issues. But I learned to speak out because lives are at stake, and because it is our duty under the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to protect the rights of everyone, everywhere.
You see that discrimination, equality, privacy, all these things are articles guaranteed by any national laws, regional laws, and international laws. LGBTI is not an exception.
States from all regions of the world have also acknowledged their responsibility to take a stand. A turning point was reached in June 2011 when South Africa presented a resolution on human rights, sexual orientation and gender identity, which was adopted by the Human Rights Council by a vote of 23 in favour and 19 against.
The SOGI resolution was enormously important, and it was also important not just because it came about, but because of the number of South states that had signed on.
Despite the substantial progress seen in recent decades, human rights violations based on sexual orientation and gender identity continue in all regions of the world.
It's getting worse. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. We see like this situation became worse and worse every year.
Human rights defenders from around the world have been meeting with states and experts to discuss these important issues through a series of regional seminars launched by South Africa. These meetings were designed to raise awareness, promote dialogue, and pave the way for next steps to better integrate the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons within the UN system.
We have so much in common. Let's share best practices. Let's share experiences. Let's extend hands of solidarity everywhere.
As Māori, we are a colonised people. We share the experience of Indigenous people around the world, of loss of land, systematic erosion of our language and our culture, not to mention the suppression of our more fluid forms of sexuality and gender expression. As LGBTIQ, we experience the generational trauma of the strict gender roles, homophobia and transphobia brought to us courtesy of the British Empire, imposed on Māori culture and instilled into the fabric of New Zealand society.
We have all this notion that LGBTI people don't have culture, don't have values, don't have religion. That's untrue. Let us not divide our citizens in heterosexual and non-heterosexual.
We are really disturbed by this resolution which came from Russia on traditional values. And I personally think that this is really a bad sign for all Europe and for all world, because it seems like this geopolitical fight on people's minds between human rights conception and so-called traditional values conception.
Por esa razón es que no se puede avanzar en muchos países, especialmente en América Latina, por estas dos vertientes. Uno, repito, que invoca el discurso del valor tradicional en relación con los pueblos indígenas, y un segundo, que invoca los valores tradicionales en relación con una tradición judeo-cristiana, e incluso no judeo-cristiana, sino laica, pero que aún así mantiene una moralidad y una ética que tiene su remitente con la ética y la moral judeo-cristiana.
Gay, lesbian, bisexual, third gender, and intersex people, as well as cross-dressing, same-sex attraction, and same-sex relationships have all been an integral part of Asia-Pacific histories and cultures from time immemorial. However, many Asian and Pacific government leaders inaccurately label homosexuality and transgenderism as Western concepts, overlooking the inclusive traditions in indigenous cultures and communities.
Why do we suddenly feel, that our dominant narrative is that of, is of a heteronormative society? Really, when you look at the Pacific, there's so many wonderful diversities in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. There are Fa'afafine, there's Whakaleti, there's all sorts of forms of that in the past have been kind of valued.
In Papua New Guinea, it's Palopa. Samoa, it's Fa'afafine. Fiji, it's Vakasalewa. In the Cook Islands, it's Akavaine. And the Maori, New Zealand Maori, is Takatapui.
Muchas veces a mí se me obliga, incluso en estos espacios, a decir soy gay para que la gente me entienda, cuando lo correcto es que yo diga soy kewa, que es otra cosmovisión y tiene que ser respetada por la identidad gay. Igual pasa con el contexto en México. El mushe tiene más de 1000 y 2000 años vigente en la historia de América Latina. Entonces, ¿quién es más antigua si tuviéramos que evaluar el término? El mushe, en cuanto a su identidad.
I would forever challenge my governments because they're telling us that being homosexual is something that comes from the Western world, but they still use the Bible to denounce us, while this Bible comes from the Western world. So how do you leverage your arguments? If you're talking about African tradition and cultures, then what are we saying about those things? I think it's time that our governments be very frank and honest about things like that.
We are the children of the rainbow flag. We are Kuchus around and proud. No one's gonna stop us. We are here to stay. We are the children of the rainbow.
When we raised issues about LGBT youth, LGBT children, getting subjected by their parents to corporal punishment, abuse, because they disagree with the sexuality or gender identity of their child, isn't that a violation of child rights? When they get kicked out of schools, get subjected to suspensions, isn't that a violation of their right to education? As LGBTs, they have proper education, they have training, they have skills, but when they try to apply for jobs, do they actually get the jobs they want? Or is their sexual orientation and gender identity an issue with their employers, with their potential employers? So now that translates, that's workplace discrimination. You are limited in your opportunities. It becomes an issue of economics, of poverty. So is that any different from other human rights?
We'd have a gay man going to hospital and is denied treatment because, well, he's gay. There was an incident some time back where a group of lesbians went to the hospital to get pap smears, and once the doctors realized that these are lesbians, they started calling other nurses and doctors to come and look at the abomination. So these are some of the things that the unfair treatment in the health sector.
The whole question of homelessness and how stigma and discrimination drive homelessness in Caribbean territories among LGBT people. Moving our governments and our cultures to a greater embrace of the notion of human rights from these barely post-colonial ideas that we have.
En el Perú hay un problema básico de acceso al trabajo para la población trans y masculina y femenina. Hay, digamos, un total desconocimiento de los procesos, de los tratamientos. La legislación no penaliza ciertamente, desde la Constitución así está, digamos, estatuido, pero la práctica social es ampliamente discriminatoria en todos los campos, no solamente en la salud, también en la educación, el trabajo.
We have, a lot of LGBTI visible coming out, and then looking for job, not much opportunities, and some private companies, restaurants, or government still do not, call for vacancies and include third genders, even though citizenship issue, ID cards are issued, but on vacancies they want to still call only men and women.
To have an ID card that is representing who you are is an entry card to society. Without it, many trans people are barred from accessing most basic rights, such as employment, housing, insurance, or even filing a complaint.
When you don't have your legal gender recognized, every time you apply for a job or every time you have to present your passport, this is a huge stress for you because you're never going to know how your counterpart is going to react, what they're going to say, if they're going to let you through the border, if they're going to give you money from your bank account. You never know. Maybe they are friendly, maybe they are not, maybe you reach your goal, maybe not. So this is a constant stress you have in your daily life, not only once a day, but several times a day.
El Frente Nacional por la Ley de Identidad de Género aglutinó activistas de distinta procedencia y fundamentalmente su valor central es que supo dar protagonismo a las voces trans en la mesa de negociación, que era lo que venía faltando. Y el producto de este diálogo es el proyecto que fue la base sobre el cual se erigió la ley definitiva por consenso. Esta ley se valora como la más progresista sancionada hasta ahora, se afirma sobre los pilares de despatologización, desestigmatización, descriminalización de las identidades trans y desjudicializa el proceso de rectificación.
Specific problems faced by intersex and transgender people were seriously debated, I think, in all the working groups. This particularly relates to medical interventions without informed consent for intersex people.
Y en el caso de la población intersex, hablamos específicamente de las cirugías normalizadoras que se realizan en los centros de salud que atienden sobre todo a niños y niñas intersex. Que de hecho las hacen de oficio, aduciendo o apelando al Código de la Niñez y la Adolescencia, que le da la potestad a médicos y médicas para, incluso sobre los padres, para decidir sobre el cuerpo de niños y niñas intersex.
Approximately 2/3 of all member states make legal gender recognition dependent on medical treatment, many including sterilization. So the assessment of former Commissioner for Human Rights unfortunately still holds true until today, that transgender people are the only social group in Europe forced by law to undergo sterilization.
On my travel to this seminar, I was lucky enough to be able to travel on a passport that showed my sex as male. 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. And back home, every time I have to produce ID documents, I need to show my birth certificate that still says that I'm female. I'm unable to have that changed because I'm not prepared to be surgically sterilised. It's something that I think about every time I look at my amazing 8-year-old daughter.
I think that the number one challenge in my region, Middle East and North Africa, is the fact that still it is taboo in most countries to talk about sexuality. Then it goes deeper and deeper, then it translates into issues such as violence by vigilante groups, family-based violence, honor killings. It gets to legal punishments for same-sex practices. Unfortunately, in my region, we have a number of countries where you have death penalty for same-sex practices. And again, it all goes back to their ideological view, religious-based interpretation of sexuality. But you can't really challenge that without allowing the society to talk about sexuality.
Human rights defenders and activists in many countries in Africa are being under attack, being hunted down, harassed by the police. They continue to face arbitrary arrest and detention, unfair trial, extortion, physical and sexual violence, rape and murder.
Les violences sont nombreuses et quand on les met en prison, c'est encore pire parce qu'ils font l'objet de viols successifs. Et j'en ai eu beaucoup qui ont attrapé le sida en prison après des viols, après des violences. Quand ils entrent en prison, ils sont seuls au monde. Ils n'ont pas d'aide, ils n'ont pas d'argent, ils ne mangent pas s'il n'y a pas des associations qui leur viennent en aide. Ils sont traités vraiment comme... je ne sais même pas si parce qu'on donne de la nourriture à son chien quand même.
The most immediate is actually physical violence all the way to extrajudicial killings towards transgender women and some transgender men sometimes. That happens. And state actors, this is the police. We also have so-called municipal police, public order police, and they're notorious for this.
Chaque procès pour homosexualité est un procès de violence et d'agressivité et d'agression. Chaque procès. Parce qu'on les arrête dans des conditions d'illégalité qui violent leurs droits fondamentaux, on les conduit à la police et on les oblige à reconnaître sous forme de toutes sortes de violences, physiques, psychologiques et dans des situations patentes, éclatantes de violation de leurs droits les plus fondamentaux.
The status of not being out makes us very vulnerable. I was blackmailed 2 times. There was a case when the police approached me and my friend in the park. First thing that they started to push us that we're actually against the traditional values of Kyrgyz society. Unfortunately, my friend was not out and he didn't want to have any problems, and the easiest way to escape from such stations is just to give a bribe.
There hasn't been any documentation to prove that there are cases in Tanzania whereby LGBT are facing cruelty, harassment, even face death. For instance, one of our members was killed last year in July. He was strangled and then tapped in his mouth, and then he was roped. The rope was at the back of his hands, and he was staying alone for 2 days. There was no one there, so the neighbors went in his house, and then they found him dead. So it is like that. But the police, when they do the investigation, they heard that he was gay. They never follow up. We went to the EU. The EU itself went to the police. They never get any information.
My best friend was murdered. I think it was 7 years ago. You know, sometimes you try to forget. He was one that I thought that was really loved in the community, at work. One day, Vern went out. And normally when he goes out, he would give us a call in the evening to let us know that he's out for the night or he's not, we'll see him till the morning. And that particular evening, he didn't call. He was found over a cliff, hanging on a tree. Some fishermen were passing and saw the body hanging on a tree. For us, we have heard several stories as to what probably happened. We have a few suspects as to who the individual was, but I think it was a shocker for the community. It got a lot of persons to change their behavior, the way they dress. I think we all took it hard, I think, up till today, because we have not gotten any justice. We have no idea what happened, and we don't, although we're pushing, but we don't think that we will ever find out what happened.
Ending impunity is the big pending task. There's the component of police investigation, which needs to be serious and diligent. Action needs to be brought to the tribunals, and cases need to be tried in an impartial manner, in a speedy manner, in a manner that is effective. And finally, the perpetrators need to be punished.
The transgender community is disproportionately affected by bias violence. Our own research has collected evidence of 1,123 reported killings of trans people in 57 countries worldwide in the last 5 years. In Europe alone, these were 71 trans people who had to live their lives. These are only cases we have been able to track down. We believe this is only the tip of the iceberg, and the reality is much worse.
They're stories of discrimination, of violence, of stigma, and of social marginalisation. Discrimination that is enshrined in our legislation and our policy frameworks. Violence that is done to our bodies by medical practitioners on behalf of the state. Stigma that springs from the continued pathologisation of our biological and our gender differences. And social marginalisation that keeps trans and intersex people isolated from each other, from their family and friends, and from the broader community. Like the trans woman who turned up to a workshop we ran on legal rights, who told the group it had taken her months to work up the courage to come to one of our workshops. She said to the group, "I am just so scared. Every time I have to leave my house, I am so scared. It doesn't matter whether I'm walking or driving or catching a bus. The fear I have about it means that I just stay at home, and that's how I spend my time."
Our laws, religion, they focus on the norms of the family, how it's supposed to be, how it is, and also the gender that you're given in these families. So it gives a hard time for some of us who are trans or ITGNC person.
Lesbians are additionally subjected to forced marriage, physical violence in the home, and aggravated rape, including corrective rape, which is intended to change lesbians into heterosexual women.
In relation to lesbians, one of the things of significance is that the violence is often invisible because it's in private settings. And as a commission, we are particularly interested in determining what the state accountability is for violence which occurs in private settings.
Our families, once we are outed by someone or we come out of the closet, that we get disowned, in the same time that our parents refuse to pay our schools, our parents refuse to actually be associated with us.
A woman is then violating a lot of gender norms, is not adhering to stereotypes. So they are subjected to a lot of different violence, from violence at home for not being the good daughter, good wife, or not at all being a wife at all, to sexual assault because it just threatens certain power structures.
Many participants were concerned at the introduction of national legislation prohibiting so-called homosexual propaganda. Such laws may violate international human rights standards on freedom of expression.
Legislative initiatives on prohibition of so-called propaganda homosexuality influenced on basic freedoms, for example, on freedom of assembly for LGBTI people.
In May in St. Petersburg past year, I'm actually participating in this meeting where was 2 attacks. It was kind of scary, actually. They asked the police to protect them because they received information that a lot of people will be there to attack them. But police did nothing, actually.
We see on the streets, for example, during our public assemblies, many ultra-right wings attack LGBT people. It means censorship, of course. Any LGBT activism, any LGBT organization will be prohibited. So we will go to the shadow, of course. But we will still work, of course.
In 2009, when the evangelicals came, Scott Lively and his group When they came with specific training guidelines of how to reach a policy that can criminalize promotion of homosexuality. So that means you cannot talk about it. There's no advocacy about it, which means eventually you are not allowed to exist. The legislation is not favorable, so it sort of allows especially religious leaders and the media to do whatever they want. It rallies a lot of societal mob injustice. 5 years ago, it was just a bunch of us, just a few of us who were talking about soggy issues. But now the nation is speaking about it. From whispers, now it's come out to be loud voices. Soon it will be screaming, and then there will be silence, and there will be some freedom for us.
Lot of diversity people, lot of beauty. Diversity is beauty.
We are cool shoes around and proud. No one's gonna stop us. We are here to stay. We are the children of the rainbow flag.
The first and foremost is that there is a resolution that explicitly mentions sexual orientation, gender identity, and preferably also gender expression. That alone is a huge win.
Let us not forget that we are dealing with people's lives. We are delaying things. Let us not be afraid to touch these subjects back home.
When we were talking about sexual rights, this is something that every country, every politician, every nation should be interested in. And I'm hoping that the nations, that the United Nations, use this opportunity to equally and actively participate in this dialogue.
The UN needs to do more work in order to engage national states and have us speak and have that dialogue across the table for our governments to experience us, feel us, and be able to take us along back home and actually say, my door is open for us to have that dialogue and really see what your issues are.
My message to the UN would be that it shouldn't just be things about expressing concern, but there should be a follow-up mechanism within the different countries to ensure that the UNDHR is upheld in the different countries that are signatory to the UN.
A UN mechanism on sexual orientation and gender identity was also recommended in the Asia-Pacific region. Such a mechanism would help bridge the disconnect between debates at the UN and realities for LGBTI people on the ground. It would pressure governments and ensure ongoing commitment at the UN to LGBTI issues, encourage a better documentation and reporting on violations, and ensure that states implement UN recommendations on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Keep pressuring the countries, keep the issue as a priority issue, because I mean the reality is, even though lots of things have been moving forward, but there are still nations that are saying that if you're gay, you deserve to be killed. If you're gay, you're pedophiles.
In 2011, I was very happy when South Africa stepped in and said, no, wait, let's talk about what these things mean. I think we just need to keep talking, but also to make some concrete decisions at a point. We can't talk forever because in the process, lives are being lost.
People's lives are at stake because of ideology or tradition or religion. And that is not okay. That is not okay. It's okay to agree or disagree, but at the end of the day, we have to protect human beings.
Just decriminalization is not enough. We must have equal rights. We must have full of opportunities so that we can lead normal life with dignity.
My message to the UN is, don't let us down.
I would like to quote Ban Ki-moon, "The time has come."
We are moving forward, moving on and on, never, never going back. We are moving forward, moving on and on, never, never going back. We keep fighting, fighting, fighting on and on, never, never gonna stop. We keep fighting, fighting, fighting on and on, never, never gonna stop. What are you fighting for?
Fighting for our rights.
What are you fighting for?
Fighting for our rights.
What are you fighting for?
Fighting for our rights.
Fighting for our rights to be